This is HIST 102, Lecture 17, Professor Short. What we're looking at today is basically industrial supremacy of the United States. The time frame is roughly 1859 to 1914. Lecture 17 deals with the growth of American industry, the critics of capitalism in particular. We begin by looking at the growth of industry through resources, manufacturing, and corporations. There are 5 primary primary industries that define the Industrial Revolution and the modernization of America. These are communications, electricity, steel, oil, the internal combustion engine, and the railroads. And I've talked at great length about the railroads and how they changed everything. We're going to get into a little bit more detail here. Communications are the first thing we're going to look at, and they are some of the most important inventions in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. A man by the name of Cyrus W. Field lays the first transatlantic telegraph cable to Europe in 1866, quickly followed by Alexander Graham Bell developing the telephone. Understand how difficult it is to lay a cable underneath the water going from, say, New York to Europe. These things are massive undertakings, and it's astonishing that we were able to do it in 1866. And then Graham Bell creates the telephone. By 1900, there are an estimated 1.35 million telephones in operation, and by 1920 there's an estimated 13.3 million. In the 1890s, an Italian named Guglielmo Marconi began the invention of the radio. These three inventors, we're talking Field, Bell, and Marconi, would revolutionize communication as we know it and thrust Americans into the modern age. Thomas Edison invents the usable light bulb. Edison himself does not create the light bulb. The idea of a burning filament has been around for a long time by the time Edison gets to it. What Edison does is he finds a way to make it usable. Understand, throughout history, you have great inventors that come up with amazing and wonderful inventions, and it's not until someone makes it profitable, someone makes it to where the general public can use it, that those are the people that get the accolades and the credit, not necessarily the inventor, but the person that makes it viable for everyone. So Edison is one of these people. With his light bulb, he joins others to create large power plants to furnish electricity. Whole cities, for the first time in human history, have the capacity for electric power. By the beginning of the 20th century, electric power, that would be the 1900s by the way, electric power is becoming commonplace in railway systems, elevators, in skyscrapers, and factories. Even in offices and homes, electricity becomes a necessity. People who are given new technology sometimes do not know how to integrate it successfully into their lives, or really don't understand it. On a personal note, when I was a small child, I remember visiting my grandmother's home in eastern Kentucky, and she had some wall plugs into her, I think she had 4 or 5 electrical outlets in her home. And I asked her once, I said, Mama, why do you have your outlets plugged up? The ones she wasn't using. And she told me, and she meant every word of it, that she didn't want her electricity to escape, that she had to pay for that, and she didn't want it to escape. This is a wonderful example of people not understanding new technologies. Now, another powerful invention of the late 19th century was the production of steel. Excuse me. A man by the name of Henry Bessemer invents a process of refining iron which removes the impurities and makes steel much stronger, makes iron much stronger, and turns it into steel. Steel allows for the building of the skyscrapers. In 1868, Abram S. Hewitt introduces something called the open hearth process of steel smelting. This allows for the production of steel in great quantities for places and things like railroads, locomotive engines, and the skyscraper. The steel industry emerges from western Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio, mostly based on coal mines in those areas. With coal plentiful in places like Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh becomes the steel capital of the world. Steel cities would grow in other parts of the North, places like Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, and South Birmingham. Steel furnaces would produce over 500 tons of steel a week. Railroads would buy the steel and sometimes own the factories. The Pennsylvania Railroad owned the Pennsylvania Steel Company, for example. All the new machinery needed lubrication, and thus oil becomes a new factor in the playbook of industrial development. Up until this point, oil was really primarily just used as, say, a light source, but a man by the name of George Bissell, B-I-S-S-E-L-L, proved that oil could be used to be turned into things like paraffin, naphtha, and lubricating oil. The first oil well is established in Titusville, Pennsylvania in 1859 and produced roughly 500 barrels of oil a month. Oil fields popped up in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. So we've got electricity, we've got steel, oil, and innovation. Now we need the automobile and the airplane, and we're just right where we need to be, right? Before we can have either, oil has to be converted into gasoline or petrol, which can be burnt. Then the internal combustion engine must be invented. Once these two conditions are met, Charles and Frank Duryea are free to create the first gasoline-powered internal combustion automobile in America in 1893. Henry Ford by the way, the very first automobile was produced in Italy. It was an invention. It was created in Italy. Henry Ford would produce his first car in 1896. In 1895, there were four, not 400, 4 cars in America. By 1917, there were nearly 5 million automobiles. Wilbur and Orville Wright would successfully fly the first plane at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina in 1903. It traveled for approximately 120 feet in 12 seconds. This was more kind of like a glider than an actual, what we would think of today as an airplane. After they improved their design, in 1904, their airplane travels over 23 miles. Most airplane advancements occur in France, where there are generous government funding grants for airplane production. Air travel remains a novelty until 1920, when Charles Lindbergh makes his famous flight from New York to Paris, which opens up the possibility of commercial flights. The early days of aviation are wonderful things to look into, but we're not really going to get too deep into them today, or in this class in general. So we had to talk about railroads. Told you it was coming. The principal driving factor in the industrial manufacturing explosion in the United States is undoubtedly the railroad expansions. Railroads give industry markets for goods and access to distant raw materials. Remember me telling you about the cow that was put on the train on Monday and is on your plate on Wednesday in New York City. Total railroad tracks increase from roughly 30,000 miles in 1860 to about 193,000 miles in 1900. So in 40 years, it just explodes. And this rail line expansion is subsidized by governments, both federal, state, and local. Small rail lines combine into larger mergers dominated by just a few individuals, such as Cornelius Vanderbilt and James J. Hill. These mergers help develop what we know of as the modern corporation. The modern corporation emerges as a defining force in American growth after the Civil War. primarily because infrastructure programs become too large for any one person to invest in without bankrupting. I mean, think about it. Who do we know today that could, say, completely, well, I was going to say, think of the Sky Star, whatever it is that Bezos is putting into orbit. Is it Bezos? No, it's Elon Musk. The satellites. His company is funding all of the satellites, but I don't think he has individual wealth enough to be able to do that. And this is what we're talking about. How many people that you know of could completely create a road just based on their own personal wealth, say from Indianapolis to Denver? It's not possible. You have to have investors for things like that. And business organizations are able to raise money by selling stock members to the public. And the investors in this have something called limited liability. This means that they only risk the amount of their investment and are not liable for any accrued debt beyond that point. So if you buy stock in a company and you pay $12 for your stock, the most you can ever lose is $12 under current limited liability laws. Vast sums of capital are raised with little risk to the investors. Railroads, steel, manufacturing, mining ventures, and other forms of industry merge into corporations. Once incorporated, we get the middle manager. The middle manager is a bridge between the workers of the company and the owners of the corporation. With the corporation comes something called consolidation. Under consolidation comes integration, both horizontal and vertical. Now, integration can be slightly confusing at times. I'll try to explain this as best I can. Let's look at horizontal integration. It combines a number of like businesses into one, such as multiple banks, for example, or multiple coal mines. Look at it like this. Grocery stores are a wonderful example of horizontal integration. Take Kroger or Aldi or Walmart or any place like that. Well, not Walmart, where they have, they're all the same type of grocery store. Okay, it's all the same grocery store. What do? They sell groceries. So that is horizontal. They're staying within their particular framework. Vertical, on the other hand, combines different businesses to create a final product. This is where we get things like Walmart. You go to Walmart, they have their own brands, right? But they also sell Keebler. They also sell Nike. They sell a bunch of different things, all contracted together to go into Walmart so they can sell it and make a profit. This is vertical. So when you're thinking horizontal, think banks, think grocery stores. They do one product, and there's a bunch of them. When you do vertical, it's a lot of different things that come together, like fruits and produce and shoes and housewares that all come together to do one thing. A good example of this in historical terms would be the production of railroad steel. A company will buy the coal mine, then they'll buy the smithing factory, all to produce the rail line to make a railroad. The largest corporate empires of the 19th century belonged to a man by the name of John D. Rockefeller. One of the things that we will look at here in this course, we're going to look at capitalism, and Rockefeller and the barons are the capitalism has gone through a couple of different evolutions, and I think we're preparing to evolve again at some point here in the next 50 years or so. I think it's going to be based around the technologies. In this instance, we have Rockefeller with Standard Oil. He's one of the richest men ever to have lived in his time. And effectively what happens with Rockefeller, he gathers everything together and he creates a monopoly. And monopoly, we have monopoly laws, anti-monopoly laws. And I think we develop those, and it changes capitalism. When we get to the idea of intellectual capitalism, things like Google and Facebook and these that have a stranglehold on some of Look at it like this. You make money from Google. Google makes money off you. That makes them a capitalist enterprise. When you have the flow of information going in one direction and one group controlling that, when you make money off of it, it changes the value. And I truly think we're going to see something change with that. And it all begins with Rockefeller and Standard Oil. He formed Standard Oil in 1870 in Cleveland, Ohio, and within just a few years has acquired 20 of the 24 refineries in Cleveland, as well as plants in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, and Baltimore. He builds his own oil barrel factories, his own warehouses, and pipelines. Standard Oil owns its own freight cars, and by the 1880s, Rockefeller is dominant within the petroleum industry and the leading symbol of a monopoly. And he's also a very good, Standard Oil is a very good example of vertical integration. Rockefeller believes that having a monopoly is the only way they could deal with what he considered cutthroat competition or the volatile nature of the free market. Remember, this Rockefeller predates the anti-monopoly laws. So from his perspective, he's looking at it and he's saying capitalism has to change. People would argue against a monopoly, saying that monopolistic industries could control their own prices and prevent competition, which they could. Railroads charge high rates for certain routes because they knew customers had to pay them. Think of the people going into New York City or the people going into Washington, D.C. from Baltimore. If they work in D.C., they have to, 5 days a week, they hop on a train. This is what they were fussing about. In 1889, New Jersey changes their laws and allowed for a third form of consolidation beyond the vertical and the horizontal. This new type allows companies to buy up competitors in something called the hostile takeover scenario. Basically what you do is you buy up all the stock, and then you effectively control the company. By the end of the 19th century, 1% of the corporations in America control 33% of the manufacturing done throughout the entire country. By consolidating their economic and manufacturing power, they created the controversy of capitalism, which exists today, and you've already heard, I think it's going to adapt and change again here in the next few years. So the question becomes, sir, should a person be allowed to acquire more money than they can ever spend? Should someone who works for their wealth be entitled to it, or required to give the profits to those who do not work or cannot work? President Barack Hussein Obama said once that he believed a person could have enough money and shouldn't be allowed to have any more. Is this true? Is this one of the truths of our lives or not? I don't have an answer. I think it's an interesting thing to look at. Capitalism is based on the belief of individualism. A person has the right to what they earn from their hard work. This is the basis of capitalism. The argument is that those who do not achieve have failed somehow to be successful, and it is not the fault of those who are successful. This is a form of social Darwinism, where the fittest in any population becomes dominant and propagates and reproduces. Social Darwinism argues that individuals rise and fall in society because of their innate fitness. A guy by the name of William Graham Sumner, who was a sociologist at Yale, writes in 1806 that, and I quote, "Before the tribunal of nature, a man has no more right to life than a rattlesnake. He has no more right to liberty than any wild beast. His right to pursuit of happiness is nothing but a license to maintain the struggle for existence." End quote. Now, while not everybody believes in social Darwinism, not everybody rejects it either. Some argue that if people were wealthy, they had obligations to society beyond the services their corporations provide. These arguments typically fall under the idea of something called the gospel of wealth. And it says basically that people of great wealth not only have great power, but they have a responsibility. I'm channeling Uncle Ben from Spider-Man here. to use their riches to advance social progress. These would be seen as our modern-day progressives. Contrary views included people by the name of Lester Frank Ward. In 1883, he writes a book called Dynamic Sociology, in which he argues civilization is not governed by natural selection, but by human intelligence, which could shape society as it wished. He was attempting to debunk social Darwinism. Ward believed that an active government engaged in positive planning was the only hope for society to grow in positive ways. Others reject both the idea of capitalism and the views Ward promoted, and formed the American Socialist Party in 1901, which incidentally is still around today. Did you know that we have an American Socialist Party? That ends the lecture 17. In the next lecture, lecture 18, we're going to look at the growth of the cities. We're going to look at the advancements in things like baseball and basketball and newspaper rights of mass consumption, housing issues, these types of things. See you then.